Thanks for listening to this Word in Your Ear podcast. If you'd like to get early access to all our productions ad-free, priority booking for our live events, and to take part in our weekly quiz, go to patreon.com/wordinyourear for more details.
Word down your way. Testing 2, 2.
Welcome to another edition of Word Down Your Way. Now, 6 years ago, there was glorious news that a founder member of Pink Floyd was leading a new band formed to perform their early psychedelic material, and Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets are out on tour again, including, delightfully in their lineup, a member of Spandau Ballet. Nick, it's lovely to see you again. So how are you, and where do we find you?
Well, how am I? Okay, beginning to feel fairly elderly now, but still will hopefully won't fall off the stage. And where am I? In my office in London, which is a small, very comfortable place just in Islington.
I think I've been there with some amazing cars that are in there.
There's a car.
A car, that's right.
Just the one. We're downsizing.
Yeah. Well, look, Nick, we were going to ask you about your memories of the very first show. We'll get on to Saucerful of Secrets in a moment, but the very first shows that you saw. Can you remember the first band you ever saw on stage?
Well, yes, I can actually. And it wasn't a band. It was Tommy Steele.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I think he was playing somewhere like the Hackney Empire or some sort of it was a music hall sort of bill with sort of novelty acts with Tommy as the star attraction. And I actually went there from school in short trousers and with my satchel.
Fantastic.
I thought it was important to go and see.
What were the novelty acts?
Oh,
comedians, plate spinners.
Monocycle with a juggling oranges. I have no idea now. It's one of those things someone could probably research. I sort of look back and I think, well, that was really quite adventurous for me at the time.
So where were you growing up?
North London.
Right, okay. So that was what you did.
So you were going to early R&B clubs and blues clubs and stuff? What was the first band you saw?
That was the first band I saw, and it was slightly similar. It was the Rolling Stones. And it certainly wasn't a club. It was definitely a sort of theatre type of gig.
Right. So when did you first play yourself on stage?
It was actually the beginnings of Pink Floyd.
Right.
I think it was about 64 or 65, because I interviewed you about this once. And I think it was Sigma 6. Was that the first group?
Yeah, but that was... I'm not sure how much Sigma 6 actually ever played beyond sort of the common room of the Regent Street Polytechnic. Because the Sigma 6 was Clive and Keith Noble and Clive Metcalf.
Yeah.
And that would have been, and me and Roger and Rick probably, because that was very much the sort of coming out of college. But
you told me you played at a party. I think it was one of your earliest memories, playing things like Beatles songs. You played "She Loves You" and "Please Please Me."
That sounds right. But it was almost. It was almost not really on the stage. It was on the floor of someone's living room. And I think it actually probably, when we first went on a stage, it was probably at the Regent Street Polytechnic in the building there. And everything up to that had been just, friends' houses.
Can you remember what you were wearing in those days? Anello and David Cuban heels.
Cuban heeled boots. And beyond that, we still weren't. I don't think we'd really thought about stage wear at that point. And somewhere further down the line, we got caught up in Granny Takes a Trip and all of that sort of thing. But I don't, the big thing was that in 1966, we did something like 6 shows. And in 1967, we did something like 210. So there was a sort of fairly rapid change from one thing to another. And suddenly, I remember us going out to buy things for the album cover for Piper from somewhere on the King's Road. There was a big change where we suddenly thought we all ought to. Oh, I know, Oliver Goldsmith sunglasses. That was the thing.
Can you remember the other cover versions you did before the kind of Pink Floyd first kind of gelled?
It would have just have been almost anything off the Hit Parade that was sort of fairly simple and straightforward, because apart from anything else, the first gigs we did, a number of them, sort of before we signed anything, were at the Countdown Club in Kensington. And the big thing there was that we did a 2 or 3. I mean, we got a residency, you could call it. But after sort of 3 weeks of playing once a week there, they had noise injunctions served on them. But we were so desperate, we went and did, years ahead of our time, Unplugged,
Right.
which rather limited the range of numbers that we could play with any with any success.
What was the first time you were aware that you were playing a big show, with a lot of people and a lot of attention?
Well, I suppose probably there were two 1966 shows. One was being on the bill at the Royal Albert Hall, and it was a charity evening, and I can't remember what it was for, but Alan Price was on, and I think Peter and Gordon.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I know, because I've talked to Peter about it.
Who were the other bands at the time that you thought of as kind of kindred spirits then?
I suppose we were looking at I'll tell you who, Spencer Davis.
Mm-hmm.
I think we went to see them somewhere, and I remember chatting to Steve Winwood at the time, and they were sort of so far ahead. I mean, we were actually more or less still at college, and that must have been the end of '66. I'll tell you what, the other gig that was significant was the Roundhouse, which was the launch of the International Times.
Oh, yeah.
And that was probably the first time we were actually, if not on a stage, we were on the back of a cart somewhere in the turntable room.
Playing what? What sort of things were you playing at that time?
Well, we must have been playing, I'll tell you, it would probably have been 3 or 4 of Syd's songs. And I just can't remember. I'd have to have a look at the Hit Parade for the late '66, and I could probably point out songs that we might have played. They'd have to have been quite straightforward songs.
The turning point would have been Syd coming in writing songs like Candy and the Currant Bund and stuff like that, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, I know we played Louie Louie because someone... There was a review of something somewhere we'd played, and it actually said they'll have to drop Louie Louie and do something a bit more progressive.
Well, look, we should talk about Saucerful of Secrets, because there's been, almost like 4 different periods of Pink Floyd music, if you like. There's been the Syd period, there was a time when Roger was in the group still, and then there was the huge international success, you and Rick and David. And now you you're continuing with the band playing that early psychedelic material. So why did you decide to keep going? Were you just frustrated that the others didn't want to tour, or what was the reason for doing it?
I think I just missed actually the fun of playing live, really. And what seemed to work was the idea. I mean, it was really Lee Harris who sort of came up with saying, "Why doesn't Nick do something?" And Nick thought, "Why don't I do something?" And it was that thing of sort of the enjoyment of playing. And one of the good things was to do something slightly different by not trying to do yet another version of Dark Side or The Wall or whatever, because there was people, they're less worried about whether it sounds exactly like it did on the record with the early material. You're not having to do that sort of
note for note.
It's slightly differently.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So Lee Harris, I think, is the guitar player. Who else in the group? There's Gary Kemp, obviously.
Guy
Which is a wonderful thing. I mean, I suppose, you would have got quite long odds 40 years ago on the idea that a member of Spandau Ballet would be in a band playing Pink Floyd. But then again, he's mid-60s and he grew up with the music as we did. So,
Yeah, and he's actually a really good...
He's fantastic.
A great all-rounder. I mean...
him and Guy Pratt, their vocal on Echoes is just superb.
Right. And they're great fun to tour with. That's the other thing. That's that. It's really a return to '67, where that enthusiasm that's there, and engaging with an audience, where you can see them at the back of the venue.
That must be very attractive, being in a room that's so much smaller and trying to communicate to people a mile away.
Yeah, it is, and then that makes it more fun on stage. You've got much more interplay with the rest of the band. You look at some of the stadium shows, and you remember that I said to someone earlier that, frankly, you needed a golf cart to get from one side of the stage to the other.
Yeah.
How do you kind of keep it fresh? Because you've been doing this Saucerful of Secrets for a while now, haven't you? And you ring the changes with the old material.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always the opportunity to sort of open up virtually any of the songs. I mean, probably Echoes is the one that needs to retain the elements of the original. But there was quite a long sort of hiatus with all of COVID, so it's not as though we've been out on the road constantly.
Right.
And you do this thing where you every few songs you get up, you stand up in the drum stool and speak and deliver a little speech. So just give people some indication of the kind of thing you say.
Well, occasionally it's a matter of sort of explaining the background maybe to a couple of the songs, because for a lot of people, they're really unfamiliar with the material. And a little bit about Syd and a recognition of what he was and who he was and so on. I mean, I'd like to do more of that. I think probably, or get the others to talk a bit. Gary's transition from Spandau to Saucers is quite a good story in itself, really.
It really is. It's fantastic. How did that happen? I mean, did you just know him socially, or how did he finish up in the group?
The answer is it's that really old school idea that you don't audition, you just find people who go, I'd like to do that. And Gary heard about this and I think had been talking to Guy. And he said, I'd sort of fancy some of that. So it was really just the first group of people who thought they'd like to join in. And that worked perfectly well as a way of putting a band together. It worked in 1966 and still seems to work in this day and age.
So he knew Guy already, didn't he? Because, I mean, Guy Guy had been a touring member of Pink Floyd for a long time. I think
for 30 years of
30 years. That's
I'd say that was part of the way it worked, because I think I didn't know Lee at the time, so I'd probably have dismissed it as another sort of non-starter. But I thought if Guy thought it was a good idea, then it probably was. And so we put a meeting together with Guy, Lee and me. And by the time Guy actually got there, I'd already decided it was yes and would carry on.
It's extraordinary that you've done this, because it seems to me a unique case. I mean, do you ever come across any of your contemporaries who talk to you about it and think, I wish I'd done that with my band, that I'd recruited a load of, people from a different generation who were enthusiastic about it and recreated a particular period?
Well, not exactly, but of course, one of the sort of influences for doing this was Mike and the Mechanics.
All right, okay.
Because Mike is, it's not exactly the same, but it's roughly the same. The idea of sort of putting something together based on well, obviously Genesis, but his own material as well.
Right. Yeah.
How did you arrive at the idea of, what particular time frame of music you were going to do? It's all the kind of, you go up to, what is it, metal? What's the latest material that you do?
Oh, well, we go up to, but not including Dark Side.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it's there's actually, as I say, there's quite a lot of material there, in fact, because you've got the Pink Floyd albums, but then you've got with Syd and without. But then there's things like the Barbet Schroeder films, 2 of those. And there's actually, it'd be quite fun to maybe look more closely at some of the demos we made before, when we were trying to get onto the Melody Maker Beat Contest.
So songs that were never actually recorded and released?
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. And do they exist? So there are the whole songs?
Yeah, they do. Most of them, they're extremely short, and sometimes 1 or 2 sort of unsuitable, I think, is the word now. They're really quite. There's one particular spooky version of an old R&B track called King Bee.
Oh yeah,
which is actually, in the current day and age, it just sounds wrong.
Right.
A lot of that stuff does.
I can imagine. Do you ever find yourself thinking, when you're playing with Saucerful of Secrets, it's so much easier now to do this than it used to be because of technology, or, the actual performance side of it? It must be so much easier, or is it more demanding? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I think in some ways you look back and you think how simple it was when you could, basically the constraints of a transit van, whereas now you're going to need at least one big full-on Arctic. There's certain things that are much easier. There are 1 or 2 really, really smart things, particularly if you're working on the continent, which is that you don't have to take your own PA everywhere. That most venues now have got a really good setup, and you just plug into that. That makes a hell of a difference in terms of simplicity. And things like monitoring on stage are better. More use of headsets, or rather than those wedges. All over the place. But I think, you look back at, or you look at a current gig and you look at the mixing desk and the lighting desk, it's another world compared to 67, where you had what can only be described as a roadie doing the sound balance, possibly from the middle of the auditorium, possibly from the side of the stage. I don't think it's easier. I think it's the same. It's still tricky, but in a different way.
Different ways. Yeah. If you're playing... Sorry, Dave, go on.
The culmination of this tour, I think you're playing the Albert Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like playing the Albert Hall? Obviously, you like playing the Albert Hall. Yes. But how is it different?
I don't know why I probably got lost in the post, the invitation to headline at Glastonbury. But no, it's got a great atmosphere, Albert Hall. I mean, there's sort of... It's a bit like the Roundhouse. There are certain places that are very suited to that, what we like doing, which is that slightly more sort of cottage industry.
Well, it's pretty big, the Albert Hall, but I always think it seems to me as a member of the audience that what's interesting is the performers can see the audience, can't they, in the Albert Hall? Is that the case? That they don't seem...
Yeah, but that's the case with all those sort of theatre gigs, which are just so different to, different to arenas and stadiums.
Right. So
if you're playing a period from 67 to whatever it is, about 72, 73, does that mean that you're getting quite a different crowd from the one that used to come and see you when they played the big stadiums? Is it a different kind of person who gravitates towards that early material?
No, I don't think so. I think. What do I think about that? It's a mix. There are definitely people who've sort of been with fans of Pink Floyd for since the inception. And occasionally, of course, what you get, which is really nice, is Dad bringing kids to see us. There's something very nice about that. But it's a real mix. There's the sort of clatter of Zimmer frames in the mosh pit. But then there's a whole bunch of younger people who've been influenced by, I think, probably influenced by the whole thing of live music. I think one of the things about all the digital streaming things is that the one thing missing is that so many people hanker after is the analog experience.
Yeah. What do you end with? What do you end the set with? Are there certain songs that you always play?
I mean, particularly, I think Echoes is in itself a piece of work that actually benefits from being played more or less the version that's on the record. Whereas Atom Heart Mother, we couldn't possibly do the whole thing, but it's quite nice to cherry pick a bit of some of the different aspects of that track. Otherwise, I think we might sort of mess around with the running order on this next section of touring.
So you're looking forward to it?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do it if I didn't do it.
Absolutely. Well, it's it's a fantastic thing to do, really to have done, undoubtedly. So it brings a lot of pleasure to a lot of people. And so you're touring the UK in June, and then in Europe beyond that.
Yeah. But it's a relatively just sort of short European section, but yeah.
Are there parts of the world where you're particularly popular?
I suppose probably still there are two things. Italy is still, and France was always sort of Pink Floyd territory, and I think that's still the case. But the other thing is, which we did quite a lot a couple of years ago, was Eastern Europe, because for such a long time that was really a bit closed off. And so we, along with most bands, we were something that was seen as a sort of rebellious anti-establishment in these places. And I mean, it's that thing of, I think, well, with Floyd playing Prague, where all the music journalists had been sort of banned for so long. And now I often think that perhaps the Stasi had then had to become music critics, and the journalists could go and operate the government.
Well, so I think Roger has played with the band, hasn't he, on one occasion?
In New York, which was terrific.
Right. What does David think of it? Has he expressed any opinion about it? Not really, but I think he's certainly in communication with Guy on it, and certainly it's not disapproval. And it would be great if he'd come on and do something. But I think after Roger did it, I think he probably felt that he didn't want to follow on.
It's so complicated.
Yeah.
Might we ever see, I don't know, what an obvious question, but might we ever see you, Roger and David again on stage? I don't know.
I would have thought unlikely, but, and that's part of the reason why I eventually gave up saying unlikely, but maybe, into unlikely, but I'll go out on my own anyway.
I'll go out and do something myself.
Right,
well,
right.
Fantastic.
So if they want to join you for the evening, I'm no doubt welcome to do so.
Welcome on the mat.
Okay. Well, look, thanks very much for talking to us.
You're very welcome. I'm sorry it's a bit sort of disjointed, but
not remotely. And we should just mention your solo album's been re-released.
Say again?
Your solo album's been re-released too, haven't we? We should just mention that. We'll plug that at the end.
Yeah.
Fictitious Sports and Profiles. Is it White of the Eye? I think that's right.
Yeah. It's a movie, a Donald Camel movie.
Yeah.
Did the soundtrack for. And the Carla stuff, of course, was terrific because it was Robert Wyatt, who I'm still so fond of and think is such a major talent.
He is. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Nick. Very nice to talk to you, and good luck with all. And we shall plug vigorously your tour dates. It's really nice to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Word down your way. Testing 2, 2.